Do you know why the deepest cuts never come from declared enemies? You trusted them with your raw self, and they used it as leverage. If you want to understand this invisible weapon, stay with every word. Betrayal from close people is not an accident, it is a structure. It begins quietly when someone maps your emotional landscape in careful detail. They listen to your fears, your dreams, your insecurities, your secret guilt. Every share feels like connection, yet something else is forming behind the curtain. A psychological file is being built on you line by line. This file is the blueprint of how to pull your strings later. Machiavelli once said that if you want to control people, understand their hopes and fears. A manipulative mind does exactly that, but in a softer, modern way. They praise what you crave most to hear, then watch how you glow. They also notice what you defend most strongly and where you panic. Each reaction tells them which buttons will work when they need power. You think you are bonding, they think they are learning your control panel. The first layer is dependence. They make you lean on their presence. They position themselves as your main comfort or main voice of reason. They respond when others ignore, they arrive when others are late or cold. Slowly, your nervous system starts linking safety with their approval and attention. When they pull back even slightly, your body feels abandoned and restless. You do not ask why, you only try harder to get them back. The second layer is normalization of small disrespect, packaged as minor truth. They use sharp comments framed as honesty or growth for your own good. You feel a sting, but you also feel afraid to seem sensitive. So you swallow it and tell yourself they are probably right about you. Inside, a deeper message is installed. Your feelings are unreliable, their judgment is superior. From here, betrayal can grow without much resistance because your inner guard is sleeping. Albert Bandura once said that if you repeat an action with reward, the mind learns it as normal. Manipulators use this learning principle on your emotions without you noticing. They reward your self-doubt with extra attention and extra warmth and extra reassurance. They punish your self-respect with coldness, silence, or subtle withdrawal of support. Over time, your mind links self-sacrifice with connection and self-protection with painful distance. This conditioning is powerful because it hides under the language of loyalty and care. The deepest betrayals are often not sudden explosions, they are final results. They come after many small moments where you quietly betrayed yourself first. Each time you ignored your discomfort to keep peace, you trained your own surrender. Each time you laughed at a hurtful comment, you told your brain this is acceptable. Each time you stayed silent when boundaries were crossed, you rewired your sense of normal. By the end, you're standing on ground that no longer belongs to you. Here is the darkest twist: you often blame only the final act. You say the last lie or the last humiliation broke your trust. In reality, the real damage happened earlier when your inner alarm was muted. Manipulators understand this, and they invest in muting that alarm patiently over time. They do not need to be smarter than you, only more consistent. They rely on one belief inside you: they would never really hurt me. This belief is the true weapon, not their words, not their tricks. Because once you hold that belief, you will explain away every red flag. You will create excuses for them that they never even asked for. You will defend their behavior against your own better judgment and private doubts. You may even attack anyone who points out how they damage your peace. Your loyalty becomes a shield they hide behind while they rearrange your reality. Dark psychology calls this exploitation of attachment. The closer the bond, the deeper the access. A stranger cannot say the same cutting sentence with the same impact. Your closest circle knows where your deepest emotional doors remain unlocked. They know the stories that shaped your shame and the wounds you still carry. They know which version of you is desperate to be seen as good. That is the version they will weaponize when control becomes more important than connection. You never noticed how often betrayal begins long before any clear betrayal appears. It begins when you apologize for having needs or for taking up space. It begins when you accept jokes that always place you beneath the other person. It begins when your self-worth slowly migrates from inside you to their approval. Step by step, your identity leans toward them, waiting for a signal to feel okay. And when that happens, they hold a silent remote control over your emotional climate. The real question is not why they changed at the end. The real question is, when did you allow them such deep psychological access? Somewhere in those early conversations, you handed them the keys to your inner world. Have you ever wondered how different everything would feel if those keys stayed with you? The mind accepts betrayal more easily when it comes wrapped in familiarity. Your brain reads familiar faces as safe territory and lowers its external defenses. This is useful in healthy bonds, but dangerous when used against you. A manipulator studies this reflex and hides inside your definition of family. They may insist that loyalty means silence even when you feel deeply harmed. They may tell you that outsiders will never understand what you both share. Through this narrative, they isolate you emotionally while pretending to protect the relationship. There is another subtle layer, the betrayal of your future self. Each time you accept unfair treatment, you throw your future self into debt. One day, that future version of you wakes up drained and confused. They inherit the emotional contracts you signed while trying to keep everyone comfortable. This is why the deepest betrayals echo for years inside your chest. You are not only grieving what happened, you are grieving who you became. Dark psychology understands this delayed effect and counts on your confusion to keep you quiet. So the hidden manual begins with a simple, cruel principle. Win the trust of the heart, then use it to edit the mind. Once the mind is edited, the person will question themselves before anyone else. And when someone questions themselves first, they rarely question the betrayer with full strength. You can already feel where this path leads if you follow it honestly. Have you ever wondered what happens when you finally start taking those keys back from their hands? Do you know why the mind defends the same person who damages it most? Your loyalty feels natural, but it was carefully trained step by step. If you want to break this psychological chain, read every word with attention. The deepest betrayal grows through a system called emotional inversion. Your inner signals are reversed until what feels harmful starts feeling normal. This inversion does not arrive loudly, it forms through repeated subtle moments. You begin trusting their disappointment more than your own inner discomfort. You begin fearing their silence more than your own unhappiness. Slowly, your emotional compass stops pointing toward peace and starts pointing toward them. Machiavelli once said that if you must control someone, hide the control inside affection. This principle explains why betrayal from close people hits like a collapse within your ribs. The mind believes affection equals safety and stops analyzing small violations. Your nervous system chooses connection over clarity because connection once saved you. The manipulator knows this and uses affection as the gateway for influence. They give warmth when they want compliance, they withdraw warmth when you resist. This cycle becomes a quiet ritual that shapes your reactions without you noticing. There is a concept called social conditioning of emotional compliance. It means you learn to adjust yourself automatically to maintain harmony. You speak softer, you reduce your needs, you choose words that will not upset them. You start monitoring every micro-reaction in their tone or expression. Your mind becomes a surveillance system designed to keep the peace at any cost. This is how betrayal begins without a single dramatic moment or confrontation. The silent trap forms when your self-concept becomes dependent on their validation. You are not just trying to keep them happy, you are trying to keep yourself worthy. Your mind thinks if they withdraw approval, your value disappears with it. This is the emotional contract you never agreed to but still follow. It is invisible yet powerful enough to shape every future decision you make. Albert Bandura once said that if you want to understand behavior, study the reward behind it. Manipulators reward your emotional surrender. They reward your silence. They reward your sacrifice. When you give up a boundary, they treat you with softness that feels like relief. When you question them, they introduce tension that feels like danger. Your brain starts linking surrender with peace and resistance with emotional threat. This is not love, this is a training cycle disguised as closeness. The betrayal feels deeper because you participated without understanding how you were shaped. Every time you avoided conflict to keep the bond alive, you weakened your internal guard. Every time you hid your hurt to avoid seeming dramatic, you created self-doubt. Every time you let them explain away a disrespect, you learned to distrust yourself. You were not blind, you were conditioned to look away from specific truths. One of the darkest principles of manipulation is emotional anchoring. Anchors are memories used to justify present harm. They remind you how supportive they were in earlier moments. They remind you who stood with you when others did not. They remind you of the laughter, the loyalty, the closeness that once felt pure. Each reminder is a rope that pulls your mind away from noticing current violations. You keep holding on because you are anchored to an earlier version of them. The mind often confuses history with safety. You tell yourself they cannot betray you because they know your real heart. You convince yourself they understand you deeply because of your long bond. Yet deep understanding can be misused to create precise psychological wounds. Only someone who knows your soft spots can strike with such extreme accuracy. A stranger cannot access the parts of you that you once shared willingly. Your emotional memories become shields they use to protect their own power. You defend them to yourself because losing them feels like losing a part of you. This internal fusion is what makes betrayal from close people feel unbearable. You are not only losing a relationship, you are losing a chapter of your identity. This identity loss is more painful than the person themselves. The hidden manual often uses 3 steps repeated over time. Step 1 is idealization. They make you feel uniquely valued and deeply understood. Every word feels sincere, every gesture feels meaningful, every moment feels special. Your guard melts, and your attachment strengthens before you even question it. This stage forms emotional dependence faster than any logical explanation. Step 2 is subtle devaluation delivered in the softest possible tone. They tease you about your flaws, they correct your opinions, they guide your decisions. Each correction feels small, but each one reduces your inner authority. Slowly you start seeing yourself through their eyes instead of your own. Your brain begins replacing self-trust with their voice of judgment. Step 3 is compliance reinforcement. They reward your submission. They suddenly become warm when you bend to their preference. They become distant when you assert a small piece of independence. Your mind learns to equate obedience with safety and disobedience with tension. This pattern repeats until obedience feels natural and independence feels dangerous. The most dangerous part is this shift happens quietly without dramatic conflict. You do not notice you are changing because it feels like emotional cooperation. You tell yourself you are being mature, understanding, patient, loyal. In reality, you are slowly editing your identity to fit their expectations. Betrayal hits hardest when you realize how much of yourself you gave away. You grieve the trust you offered before you understood the hidden cost. You grieve the person you were before you learned to walk on emotional eggshells. You grieve the version of you who believed loyalty would always protect you. These losses cut deeper than the betrayal itself. Dark psychology explains that the mind mourns most what it was manipulated into abandoning. You mourn your voice, you mourn your boundaries, you mourn your earlier confidence. Because you abandon these parts not through choice, but through conditioning. And when betrayal arrives, you realize the person you trusted shaped the harm you feel. The cruel paradox is simple. The people closest to you have enough access to betray you painfully. Yet they also have enough history to make you excuse the early signs. This tension is the battlefield where emotional manipulation thrives silently. Every close relationship forms 2 maps. The map you think you share based on love, trust, and loyalty. And the map they hold, which reveals how to reach your vulnerabilities. Betrayers use your map against you while convincing you both share the same one. You never noticed how often your intuition whispered warnings. Your body sensed shift, your mind sensed imbalance, your heart sensed fear. Yet each time you silenced these signals because you wanted the bond to survive. In that silence, the groundwork for betrayal was completed. There is a final principle few understand: projection of moral duty. They convince you that protecting the bond is your responsibility. They claim you misunderstand easily or react too strongly or expect too much. You begin correcting yourself instead of evaluating their treatment. They do not need to justify their behavior, you do it for them automatically. This psychological inversion is why betrayal from close people feels spiritual. Your mind is not breaking from their action alone, it is breaking from the illusion. The illusion that they valued your heart with the same depth you valued theirs. But here lies the unresolved question waiting in the shadows. If loyalty can be trained into silence, can clarity be trained back into strength? Do you know why the truth feels heavier when it comes from someone you trusted? Your mind does not resist the pain, it resists the collapse of its own beliefs. If you want to reclaim your inner authority, prepare to face the hidden mechanics. The deepest betrayal begins long before the moment of exposure. It starts when someone slowly convinces you that your instincts are unreliable. They do this through tiny corrections disguised as wisdom or clarity. Each correction plants a seed of doubt inside your emotional judgment. You stop trusting your reactions and start trusting their interpretation of reality. This shift is small, but it becomes the foundation of psychological capture. Machiavelli once said that if you want to weaken an opponent, weaken their certainty. Manipulators use this principle with precision, but without raising suspicion. They never attack your mind directly, they simply adjust it over time. They ask questions that make you reconsider what you know to be true. They frame your concerns as misunderstandings or emotional exaggerations. You slowly learn that your feelings need their approval before they can feel valid. This is how betrayal begins inside you long before it happens outside you. The mind becomes vulnerable when it stops believing its own signals. Every human relies on inner warnings to detect danger and imbalance. When those warnings are muted, the manipulator gains silent access. They reshape your boundaries while you stay convinced you are choosing freely. This is the illusion that makes betrayal feel unbearable when it finally surfaces. There is a psychological mechanism called emotional redirection. It happens when your attention is shifted away from their actions toward your reactions. Instead of asking why they crossed a line, you ask why you felt hurt. Instead of noticing their behavior, you study your own sensitivity. Over time, your internal questions become self-focused instead of truth-focused. You begin solving the wrong problem, and they remain unchallenged. This pattern works because the human mind hates losing emotional bonds. Attachment creates comfort even when the connection becomes harmful. You convince yourself that pain is temporary, but the bond is permanent. You silence yourself to preserve harmony and call it maturity. You endure discomfort to keep the peace and call it loyalty. You defend their behavior to avoid conflict and call it understanding. Yet every label hides the same truth: you are adjusting yourself around their neglect. Albert Bandura once said that if behavior is reinforced, the mind adapts without analysis. Manipulators reinforce your self-correction more than your self-expression. When you speak gently, they praise your calm. When you stay quiet, they enjoy the convenience. When you suppress your needs, they compliment your patience. Your mind associates suppression with stability and truth with chaos. Betrayal later feels devastating because you were trained to protect the betrayer. The cruel twist is that betrayal from close people hurts deeper because of identity merging. You internalize their opinion of you as part of your self-structure. When they betray you, it feels like your entire self-understanding is collapsing. You are not only losing someone you trusted, you are losing who you were around them. This collapse is what shakes your confidence long after the situation ends. The hidden manual of manipulation works through 4 silent tools. The first tool is emotional camouflage. They present themselves as caring, patient, or deeply understanding. This image becomes a shield that prevents you from questioning their intentions. Your mind cannot hold suspicion and admiration at the same time. So admiration wins and suspicion fades into the background. The second tool is selective empathy. They are empathetic when you are compliant and distant when you resist. Your nervous system learns that expressing needs leads to tension. You suppress your voice to keep their warmth available. This is not empathy, it is strategic reinforcement. The third tool is moral mirroring. They claim they would never harm you and highlight their own loyalty. Your mind uses their words to excuse their actions when they contradict. You accept inconsistency because you believe their spoken values more than lived behavior. This is how your mind becomes loyal to their promises instead of their patterns. The fourth tool is psychological scarcity. They limit affection unpredictably, so you crave it more intensely. Your brain becomes addicted to winning back their positive attention. This addiction makes betrayal feel like withdrawal from emotional oxygen. Scarcity is a powerful trap because it makes you work harder for less kindness. You think betrayal destroys trust, but trust was already weakened earlier. It was weakened the day you doubted your intuition for their comfort. It was weakened the day you apologized for expressing normal feelings. It was weakened the day you accepted disrespect disguised as honesty. These micro-moments create the structure that betrayal later stands upon. The mind breaks when two realities collide at once. The reality you believed the relationship represented, and the reality that was quietly unfolding beneath the surface. This collision creates cognitive dissonance, so intense it feels like emotional shock. You are not only hurt, you are disoriented. You are not only sad, you are destabilized. You are not only betrayed, you are psychologically unanchored. Dark psychology reveals that the deepest pain comes from violated expectations. You expected safety and received uncertainty. You expected respect and received erosion. You expected loyalty and received self-doubt. Your mind grieves the version of the connection it thought was real. This grief feels like an internal collapse because your identity was intertwined. One of the hardest realizations is that betrayal often exposes your blind spots. You see how easily you ignored early patterns to protect the bond. You see how deeply you prioritized harmony over self-protection. You see how quickly you explained away behavior that deserved confrontation. This self-awareness arrives too late to prevent the damage. But there is a darker question beneath everything you just uncovered. If someone can reshape your reality so quietly, what stops another person from doing it again? Do you know why betrayal repeats like a cycle until you finally understand the hidden pattern? Your mind recreates the same traps when it never learned the mechanism behind them. If you want to break this invisible loop, you must see what was always disguised. Betrayal from close people becomes possible when your emotional boundaries dissolve. This dissolution does not happen in one moment, it happens through consistent micro-shifts. You stop noticing what makes you uncomfortable because you focus on preserving connection. You stop expressing what matters because you fear emotional distance more than dishonesty. You stop questioning behavior because questioning feels disloyal or ungrateful. These small silences accumulate and become the soil where betrayal grows. Machiavelli once said that if you can influence a mind softly, you never need force. A manipulator uses softness as an entry point, not as a virtue. Their tone appears gentle, but their intentions reshape your internal structure. They make you feel safe enough to open every emotional door. Once every door is open, they know exactly how to move inside your world. The psychological architecture of betrayal relies on three inner collapses. The first collapse is perceptual. You stop evaluating reality through your own lens. You adopt their version of events because it feels simpler than conflict. Your clarity dulls, and their interpretation becomes the default. Slowly, you forget that your perception once had authority. The second collapse is emotional. Your feelings become negotiable, while theirs become absolute. You bend for their comfort, while they rarely adjust for yours. You rationalize pain because you want to maintain harmony. This imbalance becomes a silent contract you never consciously agreed to. The third collapse is behavioral. You change your actions to avoid losing their approval. This may look like compassion, but it functions like psychological dependency. Your worth begins revolving around their acceptance. Betrayal later feels like losing your identity, along with the relationship. There is a concept called psychological fusion. It happens when your emotional stability becomes tied to another person's reactions. Your mood changes with their tone. Your day depends on their approval. You interpret silence as danger and attention as relief. In this state, betrayal from them feels catastrophic because they became your emotional anchor. Albert Bandura once said that if a behavior is repeated in a predictable pattern, the mind adapts automatically. Manipulators rely on this automatic adaptation. They repeat small disrespect, often enough that you stop labeling it as disrespect. You start calling it their personality or their stress or their way of communicating. You adjust around their patterns instead of confronting them. This adaptation makes betrayal possible because they learn you will bend instead of break. The manipulator gains power when your emotional vocabulary becomes limited. You say you are fine when you are hurt. You say you understand when you feel confused. You say it is nothing when something is clearly wrong. These phrases sound harmless, but they destroy your internal truth. The more you disconnect from your real feelings, the easier you are to influence. Betrayal becomes inevitable when your silence protects them more than it protects you. You teach them which actions you will tolerate by never naming the pain. Each time you stay quiet, you train them to believe their behavior is acceptable. Each time you forgive without reflection, you teach them consequences do not exist. Each time you ignore a boundary violation, you give them permission to continue. Betrayal is not only what they do to you, it is what your silence enables. The hidden structure of manipulation often uses three psychological mirrors. The mirror of reassurance. They remind you how much they value you whenever you doubt them. This reassurance feels comforting, but it resets your internal warnings. You stay longer because you cling to the idea of who they promise to be. The mirror of guilt. They imply you are overreacting or misjudging their intention. You begin doubting your right to feel hurt. Your focus shifts from their behavior to your supposed sensitivity. This keeps them unchallenged. The mirror of dependency. They make you feel like losing them means losing emotional stability. This belief keeps you attached long after respect has faded. Dependency convinces you that discomfort is better than loneliness. The most painful part is that betrayal feels personal even when it is not. You think it reflects your worth, but it reflects their character. You think it exposes your weakness, but it exposes their lack of integrity. Your mind confuses proximity with responsibility and blames itself for the harm. Manipulators rely on this confusion to avoid accountability. Dark psychology reveals that betrayal hits hardest when it breaks the story you told yourself. You believed the bond was mutual. You believed the loyalty was equal. You believed the trust was balanced. The betrayal shatters not just the relationship, but the belief system behind it. There is a silent truth people rarely accept. You were not betrayed the moment they acted against you. You were betrayed the moment they realized they could act against you without losing you. That realization came from patterns you never questioned. The mind escapes a painful bond only when it faces its own participation. Not blame participation. Every time you explained away a red flag, you participated. Every time you sacrificed emotional needs, you participated. Every time you convinced yourself to stay for potential instead of reality, you participated. This awareness is painful, but it is also the doorway to strength. But there is one more hidden layer few people ever notice. Betrayal from close people reveals your deepest psychological vulnerability. Have you ever wondered why you ignored the earliest signs, even when they were clear? Do you know why you ignored the earliest warnings, even when they felt unmistakable? Your mind sensed danger, but your loyalty overpowered your intuition every single time. If you want to stop this cycle, you must understand the hidden wound behind it. The deepest betrayals do not enter through logic, they enter through emotional gaps. These gaps are formed long before the manipulator appears in your life. Your mind carries old fears of abandonment, rejection, or losing connection. These fears create blind spots that make you tolerate what should never be tolerated. You accept disrespect when your fear of losing someone is stronger than your self-trust. You silence your voice when your fear of conflict is stronger than your need for clarity. Machiavelli once said that if you want influence, find what people fear losing most. A manipulator does not attack your strengths, they attack your emotional fears. They identify what you cannot bear to lose, and they build their power around it. If you fear disapproval, they use silence. If you fear loneliness, they use withdrawal. If you fear disappointment, they use guilt. Your deepest fear becomes their most efficient tool. This is why you ignored the earliest signs. It was not weakness, it was emotional conditioning learned long before the betrayal. Your nervous system associates conflict with danger and connection with safety. Even when connection becomes painful, your body still chooses familiarity over truth. This survival mechanism is ancient, but manipulators exploit it with modern subtlety. There is a mechanism called emotional reflex override. It happens when your instinct tells you one thing, but your emotional history tells you another. Your instinct says this feels wrong. Your history says keep the peace. Your instinct says trust your discomfort. Your history says do not upset the balance. The fight between instinct and history creates hesitation, and hesitation creates vulnerability. Albert Bandura once said that if you repeat a pattern long enough, it becomes your identity. You repeated self-abandonment for so long that it felt normal. You repeated emotional suppression for so long that honesty felt risky. You repeated compliance for so long that resistance felt like betrayal. Your identity adjusted to these patterns because the mind adapts quickly to emotional repetition. This adaptation is why betrayal feels like losing a piece of yourself. You did not just lose someone, you trusted you lost the role you built around them. You played the role of peacemaker, the role of fixer, the role of loyal supporter. When betrayal breaks the bond, the role collapses and leaves you emotionally directionless. You are not grieving the person, you are grieving the identity you performed for them. The hidden manual of manipulation uses 3 emotional triggers to keep you attached. The first trigger is hope. You cling to the early version of the bond, the version that felt genuine. You believe the caring moments define them, and the hurtful moments are exceptions. Hope becomes the chain that keeps you waiting for change that never arrives. The second trigger is responsibility. You tell yourself you could fix the situation if you tried a little harder. You assume their behavior reflects your shortcomings. This illusion keeps you repairing instead of observing. The third trigger is guilt. They imply that your boundaries are unfair or your needs are heavy. You begin apologizing for expecting normal respect. This guilt keeps you emotionally small and easier to control. You stayed because these triggers kept your mind in a loop. You left because a single moment broke that loop beyond repair. But the deeper question is what made the loop possible in the first place. Betrayal exposes an internal vulnerability called emotional overextension. It happens when you give more understanding than the situation earns. You forgive too quickly, you empathize too deeply, you overlook too easily. You do this believing it is kindness, but it is often self-erosion. The manipulator notices this pattern long before you notice them. They expand their behavior each time you shrink your boundaries. The darkest part is that betrayal from close people feels like self-betrayal. Because you see now how many times you ignored your own truth. You see how often you defended them instead of defending yourself. You see how deeply you accepted pain in the name of loyalty. This realization is more painful than the betrayal itself. Dark psychology reveals that the wound that attracts betrayal is the same wound that avoids confrontation. You fear being misunderstood, so you stay silent. You fear rejection, so you stay tolerant. You fear conflict, so you stay forgiving. These fears create openings manipulators walk through with ease. The mind heals when it finally asks one uncomfortable question. What if the reason betrayal hurts so deeply is because you abandoned your own needs first? Everything you overlooked now stands in front of you with painful clarity. Every boundary you dissolved now feels essential. Every instinct you silenced now seems painfully accurate. This clarity can feel like grief, but it is also the beginning of strength. But there is still one more hidden layer buried underneath everything. You saw the betrayal clearly, But do you understand why confronting the truth feels terrifying even now? Do you know why confronting the full truth feels more terrifying than the betrayal itself? Your mind fears the mirror more than the wound, because the mirror cannot lie. If you want to reclaim your power, you must face the final hidden layer. The deepest pain is not that someone betrayed you. The deepest pain is realizing how long you betrayed your own inner voice. Your intuition warned you through discomfort, through silence, through uneasiness. But you ignored it because losing them felt more dangerous than losing yourself. This internal conflict is the final battlefield manipulators rely on. Machiavelli once said that if you control someone's fear, you control their choices. Your fear of being alone controlled your choices. Your fear of conflict controlled your voice. Your fear of losing connection controlled your boundaries. The manipulator never needed to overpower you, they only needed to overpower your fears. The truth is simple but difficult. You were trained to abandon your own truth to maintain emotional peace. Every time you downplayed disrespect, you strengthened that training. Every time you apologized for existing, you reinforced that dependency. Every time you stayed to avoid guilt, you weakened your inner authority. This pattern created the ideal environment for betrayal to grow without resistance. Albert Bandura once said that if a person changes their environment, their behavior follows. Your healing begins the moment you change the emotional environment inside your mind. You stop seeking validation from those who distort your worth. You stop negotiating your boundaries to avoid temporary discomfort. You stop calling disrespect love and call it what it truly is. Your internal landscape shifts when you reclaim the authority you gave away. Dark psychology reveals a powerful truth. Betrayal exposes the illusion you built to avoid facing your own fear. You clung to potential, not reality. You clung to memories, not behavior. You clung to hope, not patterns. The bond survived not because it was strong, but because your fear was stronger. The real transformation begins when you understand the final principle. You were not hurt because you trusted someone. You were hurt because you trusted someone more than you trusted your own intuition. Your intuition was never wrong, you were simply conditioned to silence it. When you finally confront the truth, it feels terrifying because it demands change. It demands that you choose yourself even when it feels unfamiliar. It demands that you set boundaries even when your voice shakes. It demands that you stop accepting emotional crumbs when you deserve clarity. It demands that you let go of the role you play to keep dysfunctional peace. But here is the hidden liberation that betrayal often hides. You now see every psychological pattern that once blinded you. You now recognize emotional manipulation disguised as care. You now understand silence is not maturity when it costs your self-worth. You now know that loyalty means nothing without mutual respect. You now realize that losing someone who harms your peace is not a loss. Your mind begins shifting from fear to awareness. Awareness breaks cycles that fear once protected. Awareness rebuilds the intuition you silenced for years. Awareness rewrites the identity you performed around the manipulator. Awareness becomes the foundation of boundaries that cannot be negotiated. The final stage of healing is reclaiming the keys you once handed away. The key of emotional validation. The key of self-trust. The key of intuition. The key of boundaries. The key of identity. Once these keys return to your hands, betrayal loses its power completely. Because here is the ultimate psychological truth. The person closest to you can only betray you deeply if you give them deeper access than you give yourself. When you reconnect with your own inner authority, that access becomes protected. You no longer confuse intensity with loyalty. You no longer confuse attachment with compatibility. You no longer confuse fear with love. And now the question that completes the manual stands in front of you. You know how betrayal entered your life, but do you know how to rebuild yourself so no one ever enters through the same door again?